Welcome to a short series of shiurim that they're going to be doing on the subject of kashrut. In these shiurim we're going to talk about some very simple problems, and we're going to go on to talk about some much more complicated problems of kashrut that can arise in every home, in every kitchen. Some of the things we're going to be saying and talking about are going to be very simple to some of you, and some of them may not be. So if you find that what I'm talking about today in this first shiur, which I'm going to talk about fish, are things that you know, then you can just skip on to the second shiur and you may find something there that is more interesting for you. But first I want to talk about very, very simple questions of kashrut. What about fish? Can you buy fish anywhere? What are the problems that can come up with buying fish? We know that the signs of a kosher fish that Chazal gave us, that the Torah gives us, are that they have two signs. They have fins and they have scales. Anything that has fins and scales is a kosher fish. Now, if it actually comes out that while there are fish that have fins but don't have scales, there is nothing that has scales but doesn't have fins. So if you're going to go into a shop, even a non-kosher shop, that is selling fresh fish, and you can see the scales on the fish, the meat of the fish still has scales on it, then you can know that that is a kosher fish, and you'd be able to buy that fish. If you're going to be taking the fresh fish home and cutting it up at home in your own kosher kitchen, then there's certainly no problem with buying the fish. Maybe you'd need to give it a rinse before you cut it up at home, because it might have been lying next to non-kosher fish in the shop. But generally there shouldn't be any problem. If you're buying a fresh fish, you see the scales, you can take it home and cut it up and eat it as you like. The problem comes when you're going to either you want the shopkeeper to chop it up for you, to fillet the fish for you, to take out the bones, or you're buying processed fish which has already been cut up in a factory. If you can't see the scales on the fish, then without a reliable hechsher, you certainly can't buy it. Because there are so many types of fish, so many types of things in the sea that are not kosher. And if you can't see the scales, you can't rely on the fact that the shop owner is telling you that, oh yes, it was a kosher fish. It had scales on it before. So you need to see the scales. But the problem is, as I said, where the fish has already been cut up, so we're going to have a problem of the knife that was used to cut the fish up. What's the problem with the knife? While we can presume that the knife that the fishmonger is using was not used to cut up meat with, because he's a fishmonger, so each professional uses his knife for his own profession. He wouldn't be using his knife to go and cut up meat. That we can presume. And even if he did bring a meat sandwich to eat in his fish shop, we would presume that he wouldn't use his professional cutting knife to cut up his meat with it. But what about the non-kosher fish that he's been cutting up in his shop? The shellfish, all sorts of strange sea creatures that people eat nowadays. What about all those things? So we have a rule in kashrut. Metal absorbs. But metal absorbs where there's heat. Where you heat something up, where a metal knife was used to cut hot meat, for example, then it certainly absorbs inside the metal the taste of that meat. But here in the fish shop, everything that's been cut up is cut cold. So as far as taste of shellfish and non-kosher fish absorbed inside the metal of the knife, that's not a problem. And not only that, also the fish that is going to be cutting up for you is a fish that is cold. So as far as a taste of non-kosher fish being absorbed inside the metal blade of the knife, there's probably no problem. But there's another problem with knives. There are two problems with knives. One is the first problem of what's absorbed inside, and that's only where it was used hot. But there's another problem even where the knife is used cold. Because of the pressure when you cut with a knife, so the fat of whatever it is you're cutting gets stuck. There's a very, very fine, even microscopic layer of fat from whatever it is you cut that sticks to the blade of the knife. That does not come off unless you scrub with steel wool, with cleaning materials, right? Just to wash that blade under the water is not going to get off the fat of the non-kosher fish that is stuck to it. The only way to get it off is to scrub it. To scrub it with a little bit of washing up liquid and steel wool or one of the other Scotch things that they use in the kitchen to clean the utensils. That's the only way to get it off. In fact, Chazal tell us that the way to get off this fat that's stuck to a knife is by sticking it in hard ground 10 times, each time in a different place. That pressure, that scrubbing pressure on the blade of the knife, that can get off this fat that's going to be stuck to the knife. Now, so what if the fat is stuck to the knife? So let's just clean off the place where I cut. That's not going to be good enough either. Because Chazal tell us that when you now use that knife, which has fat from something non-kosher stuck to it, when the pressure of you cutting whatever it is you're cutting, in our case it's going to be the fish, the pressure of that is going to cause that the fat is going to come off, not just on the outside of where you cut of the fish, but it's going to even be absorbed a little bit inside to the fish, or whatever it is you're cutting, right? The same would apply if you're using a knife that you just cut cheese with, and you're going to use it, and you use it to cut meat with. Even if everything is cold, you're going to have exactly the same problem as I'm explaining now, right? You cut, the guy in the fish shop used this knife to cut non-kosher fish. There's a thin layer of fat of these fish which is stuck to the knife. Now he uses that same knife to cut and fillet your kosher fish. The pressure of the knife is going to cause that fat to be absorbed inside the meat of the fish. How much is it absorbed? Chazal tell us it's absorbed what's called the width of a peel, kedei klipa. The width of a peel, that would mean the width that you could cut off and it would stay whole and not crumble up. Right? You're talking about less than a centimeter, maybe half a centimeter. The amount that you can cut off and it will stay whole. So if I've just cut here my fish into two, the piece of fish into two, you'll have to take off a slither of the fish on each side with a kosher knife when you get home. Right? If you were to buy that fish in a non-kosher fish shop and the fishmonger were to use his knife to cut the fish into slices for you, so when you get home you're going to have to cut off a slither, enough that's a peel, the width that will stay whole from everywhere where he cut, because when he cut, the pressure of the knife, the pressure he used caused that fat that was stuck to the knife to be absorbed inside the meat of the fish. Now, if you just had your fish sliced up, so maybe you can do that. But if you had him fillet your fish from one side to the other, if you try and cut off from that a slither all the way along the whole thing, you're not going to be left with much fish. That's the problem of buying fresh fish in a non-kosher fish shop and having the owner of the shop, the worker in the shop, cut up the fish for you. There's another problem apart from the knife. The other problem apart from the knife is the cutting board. The cutting board that he's using to cut on, that also, of course, is going to have all sorts of pieces of leftovers and fat of the non-kosher fish on it. And so that itself, that's also going to be a problem. It was interesting, I heard from a student that he was told that when you go to buy fish, he should take along with him his own cutting board and his own knife, and give that to the owner of the shop and ask him if he can cut up his fish for him, fillet his fish on that chopping board and with the guy's knife. That's a perfect solution, right? That'll definitely solve the problem. But If you can't do that, or if you've got a disagreeable fishmonger who won't do that for you, if you know that he's going to clean the knife properly, you make sure and you watch that he cleans the knife and scrubs it, and he's using a fresh cutting board, then there's no problem. But if not, then there is certainly going to be a problem with buying even a fresh fish from a shop. One other problem that we can have with fish is fish eggs. Fish eggs can be very, very tasty, right? They're caviar, one of the tastiest foods in the world. But the problem is that there are many types of fish eggs that come from non-kosher fish. So in order to be able to, and of course, when you look at a fish egg, you can't tell whether it comes from a kosher fish or from a non-kosher fish. So unless you know, you saw or you know that those eggs come from a kosher fish, you wouldn't be able to eat them unless you have a good hechsher on them. That's almost all you need to know about fish. Thank you.